This is Literature Out Loud, sponsored by Roon, the Robert Morris University Literary Magazine, and by RMU Radio and TV. I'm John Lawson. My guest today is Dr. Jay Carson, University Professor of English here at Robert Morris. Welcome, Jay.
Thanks, John.
We are in the RMU TV studios today, and this is our first Literature Out Loud that we've recorded in the TV studio, thanks to Joe Hale, Ray Zapparoni, and director Michael DeLauro. And we are here to celebrate Jay's new poetry collection, The Cinnamon of Desire. Congratulations on the book, Jay.
Thanks again. That's great to be here.
So let's just jump right into it. Will you start us off by reading a poem from Cinnamon of Desire?
Be delighted. This is the title poem called Baking the Ginger Boy's Tongue. What do you want? The white uniform voice feeds my anxious sweet hunger, but iced with the fear of women's words. Them, the ones next to, I said. Crumb buns? You want the crumb buns or the flop overs? Which? Her voice knife sharp as the red nail of her fingers stabbing at the cakes. Her ruffled pink collar, an old poison plain for her mountain head. A bumpy nose more sure than Sister Pancratius, smelling out my neck and side sweat. But my brother warned me of the rancid taste and feminine-scented sweet words, and how to lower to Bogart's lip and tongue swagger. I can't give you any till you say. Her eyes bulge at me like muffins rising in the tin. Finally, timed and done, I rise. Crumb buns, I cry quickly through slitted mouth, cut open for the first of many times by the cinnamon of desire.
So there we go. There's the title of the book, first poem. The Cinnamon of Desire, just published by Main Street Rag Publications. And it introduces the theme of the book, which is desire.
Indeed, yeah.
I want to share with the audience some of the cover blurbs. Jan Beatty, a Pittsburgh poet, says, "In The Cinnamon of Desire, Jay Carson negotiates the streets of desire and regret with the voice of someone who has lived a life. This is a writer who knows the necessary prices of being alive, yet luxuriates in its hunger, twisted humor, and possibility just the same." And Sam Hazo, another Pittsburgh poet, says, "A truthful poet engages your feelings without sparing them. Jay Carson never flinches, even when the truth becomes brutal." There is some tough stuff in these poems. They're fun to read for that very reason. The book is like a drama where we see a suffering hero. John Carson, Jay's son, is here, and there are all kinds of family revelations in this book. I want to cross-examine you about your response to those in a minute. But first, let's have a family poem called Things My Father Taught Me.
Okay, before I read that, I'd like to give you one of the epigraphs to one of the sections. The book is divided into sections, and this is from Hayden Carruth. I've always been fascinated by this. Regret, acknowledged or not, is the inevitable and in some sense necessary context, the bedrock of all human thought and activity. I think that's a sort of interesting idea that one of the ways we learn, I guess, is regret. But I like to think I've grown somewhat past a lot of it. But here's the poem, Things My Father Taught Me. To play bridge and chess over whiskey and rotting cheese, always knowing I would lose. To never buy on margin, to wear a blazer at dinner when old enough to eat with him, to say, let's skip it, to the most important things. To read, to talk in a breeze as if nothing mattered, but a big, witty, forgetful brain, except for its thin wire razor cortex, thin wire razor for cutting out the heart out of another cortex. To say, let's get the hell out of here until I have never been anywhere.
So, John.
Yes, Mr. Dr. Lawson.
What's it like to have your father publish a book of poetry, a lot of the poems about your family?
A lot of these poems I've found come from experiences that my father and I have already talked about. The never buy on margin has been a family joke as long as I can remember, being essentially to stand for a ridiculous piece of advice that a father would give their son, because what son is really investing in the stock market? So a lot of these things are sort of have already been revealed to me. My father puts them in much more of a brutal context in the poems. They're more out there, so it's a little harder to read. But again, a lot of the stuff is stuff that we've already talked about, things that we've already discussed, and things that I already understand about. I mean, the eating cheese. I mean, we could go on for days about how my father would threaten to eat cheese with me and things like that. So I know it's all stuff that, you know, or would say, you think you got it bad? You didn't sit around with your dad eating stinking cheese on Sunday afternoons. So that's sort of, it's all stuff I already knew to begin with.
Yeah.
And it points out, you know, and it makes it a lot easier to read. It's almost hard to be objective a lot of times these poems, because I'm already telegraphed the stories. I already know the things. I know the streets that he's on. I know that bakery where he gets the crumb buns. I know that bakery. I know, you know, that kind of stuff. I can picture the living room he's sitting in eating the cheese, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's hard.
Yeah, well, it's been part of your life. There's a poem that I connect to strongly here because I'm trained as a rhetorician. It's called Rainy Day Rhetoric, and I'd like to see if you'd share that with us.
I'd be delighted, John.
Again, from Jay Carson's new book, The Cinnamon of Desire, Rainy Day Rhetoric.
Rainy day rhetoric. Dark sheets of rain hiss down Kentucky Avenue. Cicero, sunny Cicero. My father will read from a splitting leather volume, hymn to me, to lighten today, to enjoy the superb stylist. Recto, verso, Latin, English, transliteration over clouding sherry. I cannot understand how to listen to the rain killing me in the master's amplified style.
The Master Cicero.
Well, there's an ambivalence there.
Yeah. So, what's rhetoric about?
I think rhetoric is basically about convincing people to do things.
To do things like to buy your book?
Indeed. Let's not forget that.
Okay, so in my conception of rhetoric, rhetoric is about evoking a particular response from people or having an impact on them in a certain way. And you've just published this book. What impact did you want it to have on readers? Or did you, I mean, you know, it's conceivable to me that you might say, well, I didn't even think about my readers. I think some poets and artists don't. What was your approach?
I have a sort of ideal readership, of which you guys are part. And I think that, and my students, I want my students to, and I think the point of it in terms of rhetoric was to get people to face and tell the truth no matter what the cost. When people ask me, what kind of poetry do you write, I never know how to answer that. But now I've taken to saying, I write about the truth and try to go 2 questions deep.
That's deeper than I usually care to go, but quite an ambition. We've got a poem here written to or about your son, probably both, the musician. I guess that's you.
Yeah. Guess so. Yeah.
Let's hear that.
Okay.
Where's My Son, the Musician?
Where's My Son, the Musician? This little backstory to this. John was back from college at the time and was working for the city, I believe, doing sound for their concerts in the park. And I thought, well, I'll drop by and see you sometime. But then I noticed that those stages and sound equipment are pretty crowded. So I asked John, where are you? You know, how can where will I see you? And his answer starts the poem. He said, you know the guy the musicians yell at, turn up the goddamn sound? Well, that's not me. I'm the guy next to that guy. Wheel of Fortune, top row right, that's me. Usher near the door, cheesy red blazer. I hear you say, John, where you are, but hard as I look, you are not there. Maybe I find you somewhere else, behind a Sunday morning memory of bacon and bluegrass, as I then tried to find us both, in the heartland of your rich heritage, Mac Martin singing Jimmy Brown, the University Chapel sermons, explaining why our ancestors can be so kind, pious, dumb, and drunk. I remember being next to you in the trains going by Westinghouse Park, watching CSX, Lake Erie, Southern, counting car, by father, by son. Later you found your own road, resonant with string basses, lyric questions, and fair play. I see you traveling that line, not next to doors or sound engineers, but alone, hard and well, bright and unafraid, and swift. I ache to give you a road map that you are already drawing. So I can only give you some of my favorite bluegrass train song. Jay Gould's daughter said before she died, Papa fixed the doors so the bums can't ride. If ride they must, let 'em ride the rods, let 'em put their trust in the hands of God, as I must when you leave me.
Let's lock the bums out of the rail cars, Daddy. What the heck is that about?
At least it's not don't buy on margin.
Yeah, what good's a father if he can't be obscure sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Well, to me, that's always been a very evocative song, because to me it means that we are all, at some time or another in our lives, locked out. We are not part of society, even maybe don't feel like we're part of a family or a class or whatever. And in that process, we sometimes feel that somebody has done that to us, like Jay Gould, somebody with more advantages than we have.
And the rich have it in for us, apparently.
This is a depression song. Yeah, it is a song of. So that's our only hope, is a spiritual one. Ask for help.
So now you're a poet's son. By the way, has he been writing poetry all your life?
There was a brief period where the great American novel was going to be written in the back room on the second floor, and then that turned over to short stories, and then we became a poet. I gave him his first gig. He opened for my band, actually, reading poetry.
Really?
Yeah, one of our gigs. So.
Do you have a band now?
No, I don't play now. I don't have enough time. I have 2 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can't really do it anymore.
Do you write yourself?
No, not really. More or less to demonstrate things to the kids I'm teaching. I'm a high school teacher now, so a lot of times I will take the exercise that they're writing on and then write it myself to show them my example of what I've done. And I still play with lyrics and things like that, but not really. Not a lot of poetry writing.
Yeah. I actually started writing poetry, writing lyrics to songs.
Exactly, yeah.
I wanted to be the Beatles when I was
Right, yeah, that's how that's how I started too, yeah.
I'd like to ask you about the cover art on your book, Jay. Who created it? Do we have a shot of this? Or how do we get that on camera?
Yeah, that's a Bob Qualter's painting. Bob's a friend of mine, a great Pittsburgh artist, and a friend who offered me a number of his paintings to use as cover art. Well, I immediately, as everybody does when they're talking about Bob, I wanted one of those terrific steel mill paintings that he has firing up and so forth. And then the ones that I would send to my publisher, he would write back and say, this is just too complicated. It's not going to fit on a cover. And of course, there are other constraints. You can't go over the back. Bob didn't want to do that, and I don't blame him. So finally, one of the ones that we talked about was this. And it's an early Bob Qualter's, and I'm really fond of it. And he's delighted I chose it because it's one of his favorite paintings as well. And I like the sense of the emerging out of sort of a shadow emerging out of the background and out of against the wall, and then this sort of gold heart in there. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a striking cover.
Thank you.
This is Literature Out Loud. We'll be right back.
Looking for a way to relax and spend time with friends? Rune, the literary journal at RMU, will be hosting its annual release party this April at the Penguin Bookshop in Sewickley. All students are welcome to attend. Refreshments will be provided. It's not too late to submit your work to Rune. The deadline for submissions is March 6th. All photography and writing pieces are welcomed. Submit photographs as JPEGs and limit words to 500. Submit up to 3 pieces to Dr. John Lawson at lawsonj@rmu.edu.
Welcome back to Literature Out Loud. I'm John Lawson. I'm talking with Jay Carson and his son John and RMU student Tam Ocorn about Jay's new book, The Cinnamon of Desire, published by Main Street Rag. Let's hear another poem, Jay.
Terrific. Anything in particular?
I'd like to hear Proportion.
Proportion. Proportion. You must get a sense of proportion, my father said when, at 12, I wanted to have 2 members of the Howe Street gang arrested for punching me in the face. And again later when I made a fool of a narrow-minded uncle at a family gathering. I tried to convince anyone who would listen that Lyndon Johnson should be impeached. A sense of proportion. So years later I took a drawing the figure course from a thoughtful artist who, when I complained of no talent, said she had special methods. On a bleak Saturday, I wandered into a paint-spattered room where nothing looked real. All was giveaway shabby, except the 7 women at easels, their laser eyes directing mine to a platform on which a robed woman was standing, then removing her belt, until all those lovely nook and nestle places fell out, and she was just there. I hopelessly drew lines that somehow squiggled this woman. I pleaded with my teacher for some of her special methods. Look, she said. I started to see how to do comes from how to see, the line from the body, only partly through the eye. Success from greed to own for a moment even the smallest part of God's iris. With the day nearly closed, my teacher came around to look. If you would only worry less about nipple placement and more about the line.
Desire.
It's desire, yeah.
Funny thing about desire. One thing I like about your title, The Cinnamon of Desire. If we get what we want, our desire goes away. In a way, this book seems to me to be a lot about that perpetual carrot in front of us that carries us on.
Seeking always, yeah, trying to find it out. And of course, there's always people leading you on, disappointing you, and then leading you on again. But somehow I sent this poem. The woman who ran that art class is Pat Barefoot, and I sent this poem to her, and she kind of didn't get it. I didn't think, in the sense that she was so serious about her own teaching. Had said, I've run into this before, which was not really what it was all about. So it's our own perspectives and what people want us to get out of things, I think, often throws us off.
Yeah.
Our desire.
Clashing desires.
Yes, yes, exactly, clashing desires. And, but it never seems to daunt us. All of us seem to press on.
Well, I know I do. Jay, that mentions the Howe Street gang, and I noticed that in general, I mean, starting with the cover, your book is about Pittsburgh themes. You're a 7th generation Pittsburgher.
I am.
Did you consciously make Pittsburgh the focus of the collection, or was that just natural because you're from here?
It's pretty natural, but I always tell people who come to Pittsburgh, I ask them if they like it, and then I tell them that we are insufferable about their liking Pittsburgh. And we can't bear it if people don't think it's wonderful. And I am both locked into it. I haven't known too much else, and I'm a big believer in it. I think it's, just the right size and has just the right ethic, and of course all the stuff that homegrown people always say about their city.
Well, you'll be glad to know that as a transplant, I also share that perspective on Pittsburgh. So
Good, I don't have to be too insufferable around you about
Have
it.
you gone on the incline yet?
Exactly.
No, actually, I haven't.
Oh, then you can't leave Pittsburgh until you
yeah,
go on the
yeah.
incline.
Yeah, you have to go on the incline.
Right,
it's like
exactly.
the best part of Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Where are you from, Tam?
From Washington, actually. It's less than 30 minutes away from here. Depends on traffic, but I mean, I'm a Pittsburgher. I love Pittsburgh.
All right. So we only have to get John on the incline.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Actually, my great-grandmother lived in Washington.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you know exactly where in
I
Washington?
do. I've actually been to the house. Name of the street offhand, but
I'm gonna say I live in a little village called Wolfdale. It's in Washington.
this is actually just down the street from one of the big high schools. They're sort of close to downtown.
Okay. I'm gonna say I know of the two that you're talking about, so that narrows it down a lot.
Oh, yeah. So once in a while, a Pittsburgher gets out of town.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah, well, in fact, you've experienced it.
But
and
they've ridden the incline. So they're allowed.
Yes, okay. I'll try to get on the incline so I can exit town. You've got a poem about being somewhere else.
Indeed, I do.
It's called Haiti Ill.
Oh, Haiti Ill, okay. I usually, every summer, I travel to Europe or something. This, actually, I've never been to Haiti, but it's, I've heard so much about it in the news that I was kind of fascinated by it. So I wrote these two poems, one of which is Haiti Ill. I'm from Pittsburgh, where we need the doors for closing out the winter, to say nothing of the occasional robber, maybe drug addict. We don't need those doors for stretchers or makeshift huts in the street or makeshift coffins for so many of the luckiest Haitians. Aside from shutting out the bad, Pittsburghers need these doors most to open and invite, like the sisters did who ran the orphanage and would not run from or leave their children. Imagine two 20-somethings facing down a government, and we've opened to let out a fine doctor who runs a hospital his father founded for many more and too many Haitians. But it has been a long winter, and maybe we're afraid of losing all the heat. But before we close, let's at least unclasp those locks.
Haiti Ill, from Jay Carson's new poetry collection, The Cinnamon of Desire. There's a, in that case, sort of understated political theme, motif. In a lot of your poems, you get a lot more specifically and overtly political. And I'd like to turn now to one of those. We've already heard about Lyndon Johnson. And let's hear Richard Nixon and Me.
Richard Nixon and Me. There were terrible storms across Brazil, the TV weatherman said, and Richard Nixon's press secretary said that the president's statement was no longer operative. And my roommate said, "You don't have to be a weatherman." Just before we moved out in the middle of the night to avoid the rent, we weren't the real crooks. We might be drafted. I am now in Rio, and the warmth is forgiving. I eat enough for a favela family of 4 and throw away enough for 3 more. I imagine myself a Warsaw freedom fighter, not a Waffen-SS colonel in late 1945, checking the plane schedules from Berlin to here.
I enjoy that Bob Dylan allusion, being of that generation. And reading that poem actually made me reflect on the different role that I'm perceiving that music is playing now, and I want to know if you guys share my perception about that. I think for our generation, if I may make bold to lump myself with you.
You're welcome, although if I would take the break of not being in it quite yet.
Back in those days, when somebody like Bob Dylan or the Beatles made a kind of political or social statement, everybody kind of sat up and took notice. My perception is that that's less true these days. What do you guys?
I mean, it's not necessarily like the same way, but there's still a lot of bands and musicians now that do make very strong political statements, and a lot of the times their bands are actually centered around that, and that's mostly what every single one of their songs is about. Kind of like the band Anti-Flag that I listen to. Pretty much every single one of their songs is about anti-government in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, it might not be as found or as common today, but I think it's still definitely around.
Yeah, it still exists. I mean, as the generation that came later, I sometimes find the worship of Bob Dylan and that sort of genre's music absolutely sickening to my stomach, because a lot of times your generation treats as if you invented rock and roll, which sometimes sort of, and in essence you did. I mean, there's a lot of, at least it invented the idea of taking it the step further into political messages and stronger lyrics and things like that. So but sometimes after you've heard your 300th Dylan is the greatest ever, you tend to sort of turn your head and go, really?
Sure, yeah.
Well, John used to play with Bob Dylan of Pittsburgh in the Little Wretches, right?
Right,
Your
yeah.
guy was quite a protest singer himself.
Right.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but and his stuff was definitely informed by Phil Oakes and Bob Dylan and that kind of stuff. I mean, I would now that I've gotten older and I don't have such a generational challenge, to the older generation, I obviously appreciate it. I mean, I have no bones about it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
tell. I really appreciate it. Yeah, well, I'm certainly conscious that bands are, being overtly political these days. Like my son is heavily into Muse, who I also like, and they get
Good
pretty.
band.
Yeah. So, are you a musician?
No, I've always thought of myself as a frustrated musician. That I do this because I sort of hear rhythms in my head. But I actually said to John one time, maybe I should study music. He said, don't do that. He said, then it's just work. So I stay on the appreciative side, and then I think I get my rhythm out. I was thinking earlier today, actually, about a poem I wrote that had to do strictly with a rhythmic sense. It was years and years ago when the internet was just getting popular, and everybody was saying, I know an internet address. And I thought, that scans well. I know an internet address to buy a Spanish ham. And, so that was the genesis of that.
Well,
poem.
this book is full of musical references and stuff, including one from, who was it? Buddy Holly and the Crickets.
Right. Which is sort of a trick one, right? Drum man, streetcar, foot slip, there you are.
Yeah. Now, I seem to associate that also with Chuck Berry. Did he actually write that song?
I do not know that.
Well, as our time winds down, Jay, I'd like to ask you to read a final poem, which is the last one in the book. It asks a question I think we all ask, and it also brings out another one of your powerful themes, your spiritual faith. It's called, How Will I Die?
I'm delighted, John. Thank you. This is How Will I Die? A Hopeful Prayer. You may see me as blurry, ashen, aching, breaking apart in your horror at my jarring pain. But that will not be me. Bedded to be boxed and lilied, an apparition in the vacant corner of my redoubtable couch. How will I die? I will drive a navy blue coupe into the deep green summer and be carried south, through mountains of Carolina pines until my deep blue ride and God's golden moving summer are indistinguishable. Violet cornflower gaining millennium speed, at first as blurry, refracted as in your frightened eyes, then clearly only one forest green.
How Will I Die, read by its author, Professor Jay Carson, from his new book published by Main Street Rag, entitled The Cinnamon of Desire. Thanks for joining me on Literature Out Loud, Jay.
Thanks for having me. It's been a delight.
And thanks to John Carson and Tam Okorn for joining us as well. This has been Literature Out Loud, sponsored by Rune, the Robert Morris University Literary Magazine, and by RMU Radio and TV. I'm John Lawson. Thanks for joining us.